As promised, we'll continue with analyzing the Nimzo-Indian defense in this week's episode of the opening school. Last week we saw what happens after White's less popular fourth moves Queen to b3 and f3. And today we will analyze one of White's more popular moves.
After the introducing moves d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3 and bishop to b4, White has lots of moves to choose between, and we'll today see what happens if White chooses to play the Rubinstein variation, which occurs after e3.
Now it's Black's turn to pick one of several moves. Black can either choose to play castle kingside, c5 or b6. Let's begin with analyzing b6. The move prepares for bishop to b7 and goes hand in hand with the Black's plan to target the center by using pieces instead of pawns.
Black does now threaten to play bishop to b7, which does not only give him control over the e4 square, but also a very nice diagonal. White can do nothing effective regarding the diagonal, but White can regain some measure of control over the e4 square by either trying to remove the pinning of the c3 knight or by using his pieces to strengthen the control over the square by playing bishop to d3, for example.
Knight to e2 is the more popular continuation, and the plan is to play a3 and after an exchange of c3 to recapture with the knight, giving White a very nice development. So Black cannot allow this to happen after knight to e2, and so he plays bishop to a6, threatening the now weak pawn on c4. As a Black player in this line, you always have to be careful not to play the move d5 too early, because if Black would have done that instead of bishop to a6 in this position, White's queen to a4 check would win a piece and leave Black in a terrible position.
White should go on with this a3 idea, because Black cannot take on c4 as long as the bishop on b4 is threatened, and after a capture on c3 and White recaptures with the knight, the pawn is protected once again by the bishop on f1. But Black can actually use this by playing d5, because it's a question of perspective. You can see it as if White is protecting the pawn with the bishop, but at the same time the pawn is pinned, because after d5 and a capture on d5, Black can exchange bishop on f1, destroying White's chances for a castle, and after e takes on d5, White has a weak king and a weak bishop.
So White should not capture on d5. Instead, he is to protect the pawn on c4 by playing b3. Black should not stop at this point, but instead continue with the attack against the c4 pawn. But before Black can do that, he has to protect his king by playing castle kingside. This is quite important, because if White would be able to reach a4 with the queen, Black would have a tough time trying to protect all of his pieces.
After the castle, White plays bishop to e2, preparing a castle, and Black plays knight to c6 with the future threat of knight to a5, threatening the pawn on c4. The plan is to force Black to take on d5. Maybe White won't lose his ability to castle, but the Black squared bishop would continue to be very weak, since it's locked in its place by its own pawns.
Black can also choose to play bishop to e7 instead of exchanging on c3. The plan is quite simple, and it is to use the awkward knight on e2 against White, but even though it could be placed on a better square, it could also be far worse. The pawn on c4 is threatened, and so White moves the knight to f4.
White does once again use his plan to exchange on f1 by playing d5, and this time White should capture on d5, because after the exchange on f1 and Black's recapture on d5, followed by an exchange of knights, White can play queen to h4, giving him an active enough position to compensate for the bad bishop. White threatens to take on d5 in this position, but also to play knight to e6, forking the queen and the pawn on g7, and Black cannot take on the knight since the pawn is pinned.
Black should here play bishop to g5, and now follows knight to e6, g6, queen takes on g5, f takes on e6, and an exchange of the queens on d8. The white bishop is still weak, but since we have reached an endgame, white can advance with his pawns and release it.
Black can also play c6 instead of bishop to g5, but it leads to a less favorable position for black after knight to e6, g6, queen to e5, bishop to f6, knight takes on d8, bishop takes on e5, knight takes on f7, king takes on f7, d takes on e5, knight to d7, and f4. White is a full pawn up and a very important advantage, and often doubly so when in the endgames. After this continuation, the best black can hope for is a draw, and that is if white makes some major mistakes.
The position we get from playing the Rubinstein variations are very interesting, and a lot happens in the games which follows. But we will end this week's episode of the Opening School here, and we'll be back again next week with even more on the Nimzo-Indian. So see you then.